We like to think that history is safely buried under our feet, dead, silent, and entirely powerless. But last year, archaeology didn't just dig up old bones and gold. It accidentally shattered barriers that were meant to stay locked forever. From the chilling ritual eyes of a stolen golden crown to cold iron rings forced to a nun's flesh, 9 specific relics emerged into the light. Some triggered high-stakes international crime. Others carried warnings of blood and cosmic chaos. Tonight, we aren't just looking at ancient treasure. We are looking at things that were hidden for a very good reason. Let's start with a relic that sounds like it belongs in a Hollywood thriller. The Helmet of Coțofenești. Look at this thing. It is a solid gold masterpiece from the 5th century BC, crafted by the ancient Dacian tribes of modern-day Romania. But it's not the gold that makes it terrifying. It's the face. Right above the brow line, the goldsmith hammered 2 massive, unblinking, bulging eyes. They don't look human. They look like they are staring directly into your soul. In ancient warfare, this wasn't armor to protect your head from a sword. This was a psychological weapon. The Dacians believed these giant eyes possessed a magical property called apotropaic power, a physical shield designed to catch the evil eye of an assassin, curse them on the spot, and reflect that malice right back at them. The cheek plates show something even darker. A repeating ritual of a man pinning down a sacred ram, driving a blade straight into its throat. It is an image of pure, raw sacrifice. For decades, this crown was locked behind heavy security in Romania. But early last year, it was loaned out to the Drenthe Museum in the Netherlands for a major exhibition. And that is when the curse of greed woke up. In January 2025, a highly professional clinical criminal crew bypassed the museum's state-of-the-art security system. In a matter of minutes, the glass was shattered, the alarms went off, and the golden helmet vanished into the black market. The heist caused absolute geopolitical chaos. Back in Romania, the public was furious. Government officials faced intense scrutiny, and high-ranking museum directors were immediately fired. Interpol launched a massive, multi-country manhunt. For over a year, the trail went cold. Experts feared this irreplaceable relic would be melted down by criminals who only saw it as raw gold. But then, a breakthrough. Just a couple of months ago, in April 2026, authorities finally recovered the helmet. It was slightly scuffed, hidden away in a dark, damp storage unit. The thieves are now facing decades behind bars. The museum directors lost their careers. The relic proved one thing: whoever tries to steal or own this crown ends up ruined. It is now back under heavy lock and key, staring out into the dark, protecting itself. Right after the golden helmet vanished from the museum in January 2025, the thieves didn't just stop there. They took something else, something arguably even more heavily cursed. The Dacian royal gold bracelets. Look at the sheer scale of these artifacts. These aren't regular jewelry. They are massive, multi-coiled golden spirals, weighing over 1 kilogram each, and they end in the stylized heads of aggressive, striking snakes. Here's the first detail that will give you chills. When archaeologists studied the wear patterns on these bracelets, they realized they were never meant to be worn by living, breathing human arms. The gold is too pure, too soft, and the diameter is completely wrong. So why make them? The ancient Dacians didn't make these for the living. They were crafted as a blood oath package directly for the underworld. Thousands of years ago, Dacian kings and high priests marched deep into the sacred mountains of Sarmizegetusa Regia. They dug secret, ritual pits, placed these heavy golden serpents inside, and sealed the earth over them. It was a literal transaction with the gods of the dead, locking away the realm's ultimate wealth to buy spiritual protection for the kingdom. Anyone who broke that seal was believed to inherit the wrath of the underworld. And that wrath is exactly what modern looters triggered. For centuries, these bracelets stayed buried until black market treasure hunters illegally excavated them using metal detectors. Ever since they were pulled from the dirt, these bracelets have been dragged through a chaotic cycle of international smuggling, money laundering, and high-stakes FBI and Interpol sting operations. And then came 2025. Just when they were safely placed in a museum, the curse of greed struck again, forcing them back into the dark web of criminal syndicates. Just like the helmet, it took a brutal 16-month international investigation to finally track them down in April 2026. Scientists who ran X-ray analysis on the recovered gold discovered something fascinating. The metal came from unrefined, ancient Transylvanian riverbeds. It is gold in its most primal, chaotic form. The individuals who stole them are now ruined, facing life-altering prison sentences. The message left by the ancient priests remains unbroken. Some treasures are buried as an eternal contract, and when you steal from the dead always come back to collect the debt. Now, let's leave the foggy mountains of Europe behind and travel to the sun-drenched ancient deserts of Saudi Arabia. Mid-2025, near the historic crossroads of Diriyah, archaeologists made a discovery that sent chills down the spines of historians. Deep beneath the crumbling mud brick floor of a collapsed estate, they found a sealed ceramic jar. Inside was a fortune, over 100 pieces of gold, silver, and intensely radiant gemstone jewelry. This became known as the Diriyah treasure hoard. But here's where the story takes a dark, psychological turn. In archaeology, a treasure hoard is rarely a symbol of long-term wealth. It is almost always a permanent marker of a human tragedy. When scientists precisely dated the coins inside the jar, they discovered they were minted between the years 743 and 753 AD. If you know your Islamic history, that exact decade represents one of the most violent, blood-soaked transitions in ancient times. It was the exact moment the newly rising Abbasid Caliphate launched a brutal revolution to completely overthrow and eliminate the Umayyad dynasty. Empires were burning, cities were being sacked, and anyone with wealth was a target. Picture this. A wealthy merchant or a high-ranking family hears the frantic thud of war drums in the distance. Screams echo from the main trade route. They realize they have minutes, maybe seconds, to make a choice. They grab everything they own, stuff it into a kitchen jar, dig a frantic hole right under their living room floor, and lock it away in the dirt. They cover it up, praying they will survive the night and return to dig it up. But they never did. For nearly 1,300 years, that jar held its breath. The family was likely captured, executed, or driven into the desert as refugees, leaving their entire life savings trapped under a house that eventually collapsed into dust. When researchers opened that jar in 2025, they didn't just find gold. They unlocked the raw, frozen terror of a family's final moments. The hoard is now kept under tight lock and key by the Saudi Heritage Commission, not just because of its monetary value, but because it is a physical monument to absolute fear. It reminds us that sometimes the things we hide to protect our future only end up outliving us. Most of the cursed objects we talk about are locked away to keep people out. But this next discovery, found in 2025 during an excavation of a Byzantine-era monastery, was designed to lock someone in. It is one of the most unsettling finds of the year: the Byzantine nuns' iron rings. When archaeologists uncovered a crumbling stone tomb beneath the monastery floor, they expected to find the simple, peaceful burial of an ascetic woman. Instead, they found a horror story frozen in bone. Wrapped tightly around the skeletal remains of the woman, specifically around her limbs and torso, were heavy, crude, severely rusted iron rings. These bands weren't placed on the body after death. They had been forced onto her flesh while she was still alive. They were so tight that over decades the iron had actually caused the bone beneath it to deform. To understand why this happened, we have to look into a dark, extreme corner of early religious history. This is a physical manifestation of mortification of the flesh. In certain strict, ancient monastic orders, a person believed their mortal body was a prison of sin and temptation. To break the spirit's desires, they would literally chain themselves. They locked iron rings around their bodies, throwing away the key, allowing the cold metal to rust into their skin, causing perpetual, agonizing pain. But here's the detail that leaves researchers troubled. Was this a self-inflicted curse of extreme devotion? Or was it a punishment? Was this woman a saintly ascetic who chose to lock away her own humanity for a higher divine purpose? Or was she a rebel within the church, forcefully bound by the order to silence a dangerous secret or a forbidden desire? When we look at this skeleton today, the curse isn't a magical spell. The curse is the terrifying capacity of the human mind to inflict suffering upon itself in the name of God. The living world locked this woman in iron, and she carried that iron all the way into eternity. Today, these rings are kept in a restricted laboratory, away from the public eye. Not because they will explode or trigger an army of ghosts, but because staring at them for too long forces you to confront a cold, heavy truth. Sometimes the most terrifying locks are the ones we build inside our own minds. We often assume that danger always comes in massive packages, giant tombs, heavy chains, or towering fortress walls. But in late 2025, archaeologists working on a wealthy Roman villa uncovered something that proved the exact opposite. It is an object so incredibly tiny it can sit on the tip of your index finger. The Roman miniature gold lock. Look at the astonishing level of engineering here. This isn't just a piece of jewelry shaped like a lock. It is a fully functional, micro-engineered golden padlock, complete with a microscopic keyhole. It was found hidden inside a secret, hollowed-out compartment within a stone wall. The wooden box it was once attached to had completely rotted away over 2,000 years, leaving only this pristine, unoxidized golden lock lying in the dust. So what was a wealthy Roman elite trying to keep secure behind a lock this small? In the Roman Empire, miniature gold locks were used for two very specific, very dangerous purposes. The first was political treason. Emperors like Nero or Caligula had spies everywhere. If you were writing a private journal plotting against the state or keeping a list of secret allies, you locked that scroll in a microbox that you could swallow or hide at a moment's notice. But the second reason is much darker. Romans used these tiny locked boxes to store highly concentrated lethal poisons, belladonna, hemlock, or crushed arsenic. A single drop could eliminate a political rival or a cheating spouse. It was a literal mechanism of life and death, small enough to hide in plain sight. But the real curse of this lock is that it worked too well. The box decayed, the owner died, perhaps consumed by the very treason or poison they were hiding, but the lock remained closed. It successfully locked its secret away from history. Even today, researchers are using advanced micro-CT scans to peer inside the microscopic mechanism, terrified that forcing it open with a physical key might destroy the fragile metal. This tiny golden padlock leaves us with a brilliant insight into human nature. The smaller the lock, the more toxic the secret. It proves that thousands of years ago, just like today, our ancestors built barriers not to keep the outside world out, but to keep their own worst impulses locked safely away in the dark. For our next discovery, we are moving deep into Eastern Europe, where a massive secret was literally pulled out of a church wall. Late last year, during structural restorations of the historic Vilnius Cathedral in Lithuania, workers knocked through a thick layer of plaster. What they found inside wasn't empty space. It was a massive, long-lost cache of royal and ecclesiastical wealth, bricked up so perfectly that history completely forgot it existed. The royal treasure of Vilnius Cathedral. Imagine the scene. As the modern dust cleared, flashlight beams hit massive silver plates, solid gold chalices, and heavily encrusted royal regalia dating back centuries. But to understand why this treasure carries a protective, almost cursed weight, we have to look at why it was sealed away. This wasn't a casual piggy bank. This hoard represents the very survival of a kingdom's spiritual and political legitimacy. Centuries ago, Lithuania found itself caught in the crosshairs of brutal invasions. Terrified that invading armies would loot the cathedral, melt down the sacred gold, and destroy the kingdom's heritage, the high priests made a desperate choice. In the dead of night, they gathered the nation's most sacred treasures, stacked them inside a hollow section of the structural walls, and bricked them over. They painted it to look exactly like the rest of the church, sealing the secret with an unspoken divine vow. Anyone who dared tear down these holy walls for greed would face eternal damnation. Then the priests died. The empire collapsed, and the secret was buried alive under centuries of history. Armies marched over this cathedral, wars raged outside, and millions of people walked right past this wall, completely oblivious to the fact that millions of dollars in royal gold was sleeping just inches from their shoulders. When this treasure was unlocked in 2025, it didn't just bring back beautiful art. It woke up a heavy, sleeping historical gravity. It proves that the physical structures built around us are often fortresses of hidden human panic. The priests locked this treasure inside the very fabric of the church to protect it from the world. And it stayed hidden, waiting for the exact right moment to finally stare back at us. For our seventh relic, we are plunging deep into the freezing, murky waters of Poland. In late 2025, a team of underwater archaeologists working near the historic island stronghold of Lake Lednica pulled something incredible from the lake bed silt. A beautifully preserved, ornately decorated iron spearhead, heavily inlaid with genuine silver. This is the Lake Lednica Royal Spear. Look at the craftsmanship of this weapon. This wasn't a cheap tool used by a common foot soldier. This was an elite royal status symbol, likely belonging to a high-ranking warrior or a chieftain from the dawn of the Polish state, a time when kings held mass Christian baptisms in these exact waters. But when metal experts examined this weapon in the lab, they discovered a chilling detail. The spearhead hadn't been lost by accident during a boat accident or a chaotic battle. Before it entered the water, the steel blade had been intentionally, forcefully bent out of shape. In the ancient world, this weapon had been systematically killed. Why would a warrior deliberately destroy their most valuable weapon and throw it into a dark lake? To understand this, we have to look at the deeply spiritual psychology of ancient European tribes. When a brutal war finally ended, or when a warrior committed a terrible act of violence, they believed the weapon itself became stained with a blood curse. It held on to the restless spirits of the men it had slain. To break that curse and lock away the weapon's bloodlust forever, the owner would perform a ritual sacrifice. They would physically bend the blade to strip it of its lethal power, march to the center of a sacred lake, and drop it into the freezing depths. It was a literal mechanism of spiritual disarmament. They were locking the weapon away in a watery vault, offering its violent spirit back to the gods of the underworld to buy peace for the living. When the spear was pulled from the silt in 2025, it didn't restart an ancient war. But it did unlock a profound human truth. It proves that thousands of years ago our ancestors understood something we often forget, that violence leaves a permanent scar on the soul. They locked this spear away in the dark water to drown its rage, and by dragging it back into the light, we are forced to confront the heavy, twisted ghosts of our own violent past. For our eighth discovery, we are traveling to the ancient thermal springs of Bath, England. In late 2025, during an ultra-precise excavation of the sacred, bubbling waters, archaeologists uncovered a fresh, untouched cache of small, heavy artifacts. They looked like crumpled pieces of garbage. But when a specialized conservation lab carefully unrolled them, they realized they were looking at ancient text messages of pure, unadulterated spite. These are the cursed tablets of Bath. Look at how these were made. These are thin sheets of pure lead. 2,000 years ago, Celtic Roman citizens who felt cheated or robbed would scratch furious messages into the metal. But they didn't just write normally. To make the magic more potent, they often wrote the letters entirely backwards. And the messages? They are terrifyingly petty. One tablet demands that the goddess Sulis Minerva torture a thief who stole a pair of gloves. Another asks the gods to drain the blood and rot the eyes of someone who stole a basic tunic. But it's the physical ritual of how they locked these curses that makes them haunting. Once the hateful words were carved, the writer would fold the lead sheet into a tight square, literally locking the text inside. Then, they would take a heavy iron nail and drive it straight through the center of the tablet, symbolically piercing the victim's soul. Finally, they would march to the boiling, steaming thermal springs and cast the heavy lead into the dark water, sending the curse directly down to the gods of the underworld. When these tablets were unlocked and unrolled in 2025, they didn't trigger a physical explosion. But they opened a window into a dark, raw human truth. It proves that thousands of years ago, when human beings lost something as small as a pair of shoes, their immediate instinct wasn't to forgive. It was to freeze their anger into a block of lead, lock it with a nail, and call down divine torture from the dark. These tablets are a permanent monument to human malice. They were locked away in the water to execute a sentence of hatred. And by pulling them back into the light, we are looking at the exact frozen moment when human anger became immortal. And finally, our ninth and final relic takes us to the misty, prehistoric valleys of Switzerland, where humanity built a symbol of ultimate power, and then buried it out of pure terror. In 2025, a team of researchers using advanced digital reconstruction and intense metallurgical testing finally solved the mystery of a highly controversial Bronze Age artifact, an object that is absolutely unique in the entire history of Europe, the Bronze Hand of Prêles. Look at this striking image. It is a life-sized bronze sculpture of a human hand, complete with a beautifully crafted solid gold cuff wrapped around the wrist. The interior of the hand is completely hollow, designed with a socket at the base. This means it wasn't just a statue sitting on a shelf, it was built to be mounted, either onto a long, heavy wooden staff of command or directly onto the skeletal, decaying forearm of a dead ruler. This is the oldest three-dimensional bronze sculpture of a human body part ever found in Europe. But why lock a golden hand inside a dark, elite grave? To understand this, we have to look at the raw, primal psychology of power. In the Bronze Age, a leader wasn't just a political boss. They were viewed as a living god, a bridge between the heavens and the earth. The hand was the ultimate symbol of their command. By casting that authority in eternal bronze and wrapping it in divine gold, they created a physical proxy of power, a hand that could theoretically rule forever. But human life is incredibly fragile. When that elite ruler finally died, a wave of profound panic hit the community. They realized that if someone else wore that golden hand, they could steal the dead man's spiritual authority. So, to prevent cosmic theft and protect the social order, they performed a final, drastic ritual. They marched to his tomb, placed the bronze hand beside his bones, and locked it away deep inside the earth, sealing it with heavy stones. They buried his power so that no living man could ever wield it again. When scientists ran the final tests on this relic in 2025, they didn't just find copper and gold. They unlocked a permanent monument to human ego. It proves that we are terrified of our own mortality. We build symbols of our own greatness because we are desperate to be remembered. The Bronze Hand of Prêles was locked away in the dark to freeze a dead man's power in time. And today it stands as a silent reminder that no matter how much gold we wear and no matter how hard we fight for control, in the end, the earth always reclaims our crowns. Every time we break a seal, open a tomb, or drag an ancient relic back into the light, we aren't just uncovering beautiful art or raw gold. We are committing an act of historical trespassing. The ancestors who buried the Dacian bracelets or nailed the cursed tablets into the water fully expected those objects to stay in the dark until the end of time. They built these barriers to lock away their fear, their rage, and their blood oaths. And when we open them, we inherit that heavy, unresolved human drama. The chaotic heists and cosmic warnings of last year proved one thing. Some locks were never designed to be opened by modern keys. Maybe the real curse isn't magical at all. Maybe the curse is our own refusal to let the past just rest in peace.